U.S. Marine Sergeant Andrew Tamaresi has been jailed in Tijuana, Mexico since telling agents he accidentally crossed the border nearly 2 months ago with his 3 registered guns. The incident is shedding light on the problems with Mexico's legal system. Philip Holloway, a criminal defense attorney and former Navy JAG, is personally familiar with this specific border crossing and says it's quite confusing. He joins us to discuss why a little common sense could have prevented this whole situation to begin with. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you.
Let's start with what we believe happened. Sergeant Tamaresi missed the last California exit, taking him to this border crossing. Do you think Americans are more at risk when they drive across the border versus walk it?
That's very true. Yes, they are more at risk because it's difficult to tell precisely where the border is when you're driving across that border. As you said, I've been through it myself a few times. Typically on foot. There's a parking lot off to the side where Americans will park their car on the U.S. side of the border and walk across into Tijuana when they are there for tourist reasons. If you're going to go a little bit further south into Baja California, most people will drive across, and it's more of like a zone rather than a line of demarcation, so it's very difficult to tell exactly when you enter the Mexican side. On the other hand, if you're on foot, there's literally a turnstile that you walk through, and you know that when you're through that turnstile, you're in Mexico.
So it sounds like you're saying this is pretty confusing. What do you suggest that we do if this happens to us?
I think the best thing that someone could do if they find themselves in that particular situation is stop. Do not go into the country. If you have to stop in the middle of the road and block traffic, do like he did, call 911. But unfortunately, in this situation, he was already past the line of the border. It's very difficult to tell where it is, and so it's easy to understand how you could accidentally be on the other side, given the fact that the actual line is not very clear.
So one of the things that is different in the United States is that officers, they make the arrest if they suspect a crime has occurred, and then the prosecutors decide whether or not to prosecute. Do you think it's too much pressure if we actually put everything in the hands of a border agent and give them the discretion and say, okay, you can go, you can stay, you're under arrest, you're not?
These border agents do have a lot of discretion, and in fact, it's my understanding that in this particular case, they were initially going to let him return back to the U.S. before they were stopped by a soldier. I recall myself being in Tijuana as a tourist and feeling somewhat uneasy because there was this almost general distrust of the military presence that you see everywhere. We were told that if we found ourselves inside a Mexican jail, that we might be there for a very long time because Mexico tends to want to remind the United States that it is a sovereign entity and it is very willing to enforce its own laws.
Which is exactly takes me to the next question. What kind of changes do you think need to be made in order to protect citizens and protect people who don't end up in this situation and end up in a Mexican jail for a few months?
Obviously, Tamara, we cannot change Mexican law. We can, I think, do some things on the back end from a diplomacy side. The State Department probably, in this case, is working back channels, I would guess, very feverishly. They may not be doing it quite openly, but I think there's probably some back channel communication going on. But the best thing that can be done is to educate people. Educate the service members who are stationed there not to cross that border.
How often do you think this happens? It sounds like, from what you're saying, this isn't the first time something like this occurred.
This is not the first time it's occurred. It's happened quite frequently in San Diego as well as in Texas, where active duty service members accidentally cross the border without knowing that they're actually in Mexico. And in all instances that I've read up on, they eventually were released because under Mexican law, the absence of an intention to violate the law or to enter the country can be considered as a grounds for an exception to the general rule, which is harsh punishment for possession of firearms in Mexico.
Well, as a fellow criminal defense attorney, you know that press coverage can sometimes upset the prosecutors and the judge. Do you think in this case that's the problem, that the media attention is hurting Sergeant Tamaresi's case?
I doubt it's really hurting it directly. Here's where it can help. I think the media attention should be focused towards the American government and the U.S. authorities and what we can do from our side diplomatically. I don't think the judge in Mexico is really going to be paying very much attention to what the U.S. media has to say about this, because, after all, from their position, look, they complain about what the United States and states like Texas and other border states do with their citizens in the criminal justice system all the time, and they are routinely ignored because our border states feel like they're entitled to enforce their own laws however they see fit.
So you
I
don't
think the media...
Let me just ask you, you don't think that the press coverage and interviews like this actually put pressure on the Mexican government to make a decision?
I think it will put pressure to a point, but I don't think it's going to directly influence the outcome. I think the better use of the press coverage and the national attention that this is getting is to focus Washington's attention on the problem and get Washington to step up its efforts behind the scenes diplomatically.
Well, thank you so much for your insight on this case, and for more of the story about Sergeant Tamarasi, please check out foxnews.com, and we'll see you next time.